Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for logging on today. My name is Aubrey Snyder. I work with the Technical Assistance Center at Utah State University. We are hosting a transformation series about providers who have gone through the settings role transformation, who are in the process of going through the transformation, and just want to be able to share stories with everyone and create that community of learning. So today, instead of bringing in someone from Utah, we actually have the Center for Human Services. They are a provider out of Missouri, and they are an APSE Award-Winning organization for their practices in employment first, and they are here to talk to us about their transformation of their employment program as well as their center as a whole. So I'm going to give the time over to Ann Graff and Kimberly Anderson, who are going to be our presenters today. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. Myself and Ann and Kimberly can see them and can answer them for you. And enjoy. Thanks, you guys.
Okay, thank you, Aubrey. This is Ann Graff, and I'm the CEO of the Center for Human Services. Just a little bit about my background. I've been with the center for 32 years. Started as a direct support professional working in a group home and worked my way up through the ranks over time. I've been the CEO for 12 years. And we're going to talk a little bit today about the transformation that we made over the last 8 years. I'm going to let Kim introduce herself also.
Hi, my name is Kim Anderson. I'm the Director of Employment Services here at the Center. I've been with the Center for about 7 years. And Ann will talk a little bit about when I came on and the role I played, and then I'll take over and you'll hear plenty about what I've done at the Center over the last 7-ish years.
So let's just get started. So just to tell you a little bit about the Center for Human Services, we were established in 1955 when 3 young attorneys who were doing social services in Missouri gathered around a parking meter downtown in Sedalia, Missouri. Sedalia is a very small community, about 20,000 people, right in the middle of Missouri. And they decided to combine their resources in 1955 and hire a teacher. And they created the first classroom in Missouri for children with disabilities. And they started with 1 teacher and 9 children in that classroom. Today, if you fast forward to today, the center serves 39 counties in the state of Missouri, and we serve over 5,000 individuals, both children and adults with disabilities in those 39 counties. Our main service areas are that we do employment, obviously. We have residential and day program services. We also have children's services, early Head Start, Missouri First Steps, and we do case management for adults with disabilities. In those, we do some of those services in various counties in the state. To go to our employment services, in 1966, we were the first organization to establish a shelter workshop in the state of Missouri, and we did that with a council from the Developmental Disabilities Council, or with a grant from the Developmental Disabilities Council. And then in 1972, we established a satellite in Saline County, which is Marshall, Missouri, about 30 miles from Sedalia. And then in 1987, we were one of the first supported employment providers in the state of Missouri, and we became supported employment providers through Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation. And some of you may ask why we want to change or why we wanted to change, and there were several things that were happening when we started our change process in 2011. First of all, we've been CARF accredited since we became a vocational rehabilitation provider in 1986. That was a requirement to be a vocational rehabilitation provider, and so we became accredited, and we've been nationally accredited at the highest level ever since 1986. We were certified through our sheltered workshop through Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We had a beautiful building that was donated to us in 1986, right about the time we started being vocational rehabilitation providers. We had a donor that donated $1 million building in the middle of the industrial park for our sheltered workshop. So we have a 60,000 square foot building that housed our sheltered workshop and also some of our administrative functions. Like I said, we've been around since 1955. We have always been recognized as one of the leaders in the state, if you will, and have held ourselves to high standards. We've had donors that have followed us kind of since the beginning of time, as evidenced by the donation of this building. But in 2011, I had been in my job then, I think, about 3 years, and I just asked a question of my director of employment at that point. I said, you know, we've got a lot of people. We had about, I think at that time, 165 people that we were serving in our sheltered workshop. And we also had our supported employment program going. But the question I asked was, how many people have moved out of our sheltered workshop into supported employment or into community employment in the last year? And the answer to that question was nobody had moved out of our sheltered workshop that year anyway. And, you know, as I walked through our workshop, I could see that we had many people that were very functioning very highly. Many of them were making already over minimum wage working in our sheltered workshop. And that just didn't seem to make any sense to me that those people weren't out working in the community. And I heard all kinds of excuses as to why they weren't. They didn't want to go. Their parents didn't want them to go. You know, they were scared. They liked staying with their friends. It's the same questions or same answers that you hear all the time, but it just didn't ring well with me. And so we appointed a team at that point just to look at what would it take to begin to get people out into the community. And I'll tell you, at that point, we had no intention of shutting down our sheltered workshop. It was the farthest thing from our mind. In fact, that was about the same time that I applied for a community development block grant for the building to remodel the building. And we were successful with that and got a $400,000 grant to remodel our building. And it was contingent on us having employment services in the building. And I'll talk a little more about the building later, and what we've done with that and what our challenges still are with our building. So, like I said, well, at the time we started, we had 165. In 2013, we had 141 people employed in our sheltered workshop. And about that time, we had an opening for a manager in our employment services, and we were able to hire Kim Anderson. And I think real early on, after we hired her, I could see in her that she was an agent of change. She came in with a lot of new, fresh ideas. She was in charge at that point of our job preparation, our pre-vocational training, our curriculum, and all of our supported and community employment. And she worked kind of with the sheltered workshop, but not in the sheltered workshop. She was, again, her job was to get people jobs in the community. The other thing that began happening right around that time was we started hearing about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And as we learned more and more about that, we found out that the sheltered workshop was really not going to be the first option for people. And so it just kind of spurred our committee to work a little harder. We also, at the state level, had a whole gob of new Medicaid waiver definitions that came about around employment that changed the way we were going to have to do business. And so lots of changes were happening externally at the same time we were looking at internal changes. And so it just began to move us forward, even though, you know, like I said at the time, we still had no thought that we were going to shut down our sheltered workshop. Then we received a grant from the Missouri Developmental Disabilities Council to attend an APSE transformation conference in, where was it, Minneapolis? Detroit, okay, Detroit, and it was like in November. It wasn't a fun time to go to Detroit, but we went anyway. And what happened at that conference, it was the first time that I had heard anyway, and I think probably most of my staff that went, that we had heard that people had actually been successful in making the transition from sheltered to community employment. And I can remember sitting at the airport as we were getting ready to fly home, and sitting around, we were having supper and going, okay, what are we going to do with all this stuff we learned? And we kind of made a little plan about what were the steps we were going to take when we got back. But the biggest takeaway that we got from that conference was, don't try to go back and shut down a workshop that has 150 people in it and say, and don't go back and say you're going to shut it down in 2 months and displace 150 people. They said, do it one person at a time. And in fact, go back and pick the person that's most likely, not somebody that has a guardian that's going to object, not somebody that is afraid. Go back and pick the one that really would kind of like to try it and get them a job. And then take the next person and get them a job. And so that's exactly what we did. We went, and Kim's going to talk in more detail about how that really worked. But as we began to have some success with the one person and the next person and the next person, we began to gain confidence in getting people employed in the community, people that had formerly been in our workshop employed in the community. This is just a quote that Kim likes, and it's a great one. One reason people resist change is because they focus on what they have to give up instead of what they have to gain. And I think probably the biggest lesson we learned was that as people got jobs in the community, what we were seeing very, very quickly was that they were gaining confidence themselves. They were being able to do stuff that they couldn't do before. They were being able to go places that they couldn't go before. They had pride in their jobs, and they were coming back and they were starting to talk to people at the workshop. They were starting to talk to their friends. And when their friends saw them with their new watch or their new clothes or whatever it was that they were able to get because they had more income, it started kind of gaining momentum. And so the staff were starting to see this also. Now, I threw this slide in here because this is, if you haven't ever heard of Cy Wakeman, she is an HR consultant, and her stuff is called reality-based leadership. And one of the things she talks about in her, you need to look her up on the internet, because she's got Facebook posts and podcasts and all kinds of stuff. But she talks about not talking about change as change, because people will set their heels and they will say, I'm not changing. But if you start talking about today's reality, it's a little bit different conversation. And and I think Kim's going to talk a little bit also about some of the challenges we had with staff. But when you start making these kinds of transformations, you really can't have to talk to your staff about the fact that you don't really have 3 options. You only have 2 options. You can stay, you can get on board and do it in a joyful manner, or we can help you find something else that's going to fit what you want to do better. The third option that people think they have is to stay and protest. And really, as you're making a transformation like this, you can't have the people that stay in protest. They will slow things down faster than anything. And I will tell you that in this process, over the 8 years that we did this process, we had a lot of staff changes, and there were just some people. I can remember we had a manager in our workshop that she just could not wrap her mind around the fact that her best employees in the workshop really needed to be out in the community. She wanted to keep them because it was a whole lot easier for her to do her job when those people were there. They were our high producers. We had a first aid kit contract with the federal government, and we had to get those first aid kits out. What she couldn't wrap her head around was that she could train other people to do those kits, and her high producers could go out and get a job in the community. And ultimately, she left the agency because she just was not going to make that change. So I will tell you that as you have these transitions, people don't have three options. They have two. They can stay and get on board joyfully, or they can leave peacefully. I want to talk a little bit about the board. We had founders sitting on the board. I had a lady that she had been on our board pretty much since 1955. She'd been on the board 50 years or better. Now, she probably hadn't been on since 1955, but she'd been on the board 50 years or better. We like I said, we had donated buildings. The building that our employment services and our workshop was in was $1 million donation in 1986. It sits right in the middle of the industrial park in Sedalia. It's a prominent building. It's a nice building. We had legacy services. Like I told you earlier, we were the first sheltered workshop in the state of Missouri. A lot of people had a lot of investment. But what I did was I started talking to my board very, very early. I started talking to them in 2011 and just beginning to prepare them for the fact that we were taking a new direction. We were going to shoot more for community employment than we ever had before. We started tracking on our dashboard that the board got how many people were employed every month in the community and what the wages were in the community. And we tracked on our dashboard what the wages were in the workshop, and you could begin to see a big disparity where our workshop, and we really had a pretty highly paid workshop. Our people working in the workshop were making an average of, I think it was $5.35 an hour, but the people working in the community were making an average of $9.50 an hour. And so I had board members starting to ask me, well, how does that work? Why would somebody work for only $5.35 an hour? And, those were questions that had to be answered. And the board started hearing from me early on that changes need to happen. When the Workforce Investment Act happened, and when they really started moving it forward, I was telling the board at every meeting, here's what I'm hearing about workforce investment. Here's what I'm hearing from Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Here's what I'm hearing from Voc Rehab. We're going to have to change the way that we do business, because we are no longer going to be able to take people right out of school into the sheltered workshop. And it really, I think by the time Kim, and I've got this thing here that says Kim's presentation to the board, when we finally made the decision that it was time to think about shutting down the workshop, Kim came and did a presentation to the board. And with the exception of the one board member that had been on the board for 50 years and had been there when we started the sheltered workshop, my board voted unanimously to shut down the facility. We had some discussion, and I'll tell you, this one board member, even though she actually did not vote against it, she abstained from the vote, and she was very, very good. She did not badmouth the agency. She didn't agree with it. But she retired from the board about 3 months after this vote, and she is still a strong supporter of our agency. So even though she didn't agree with it, and it kind of hurt her feelings because it was something she had started, she's still a supporter of this agency, and her son still receives services from us. So I think my longevity with the agency, the board trusted me. And they knew that I was telling them the truth. They didn't think I was telling them stories. Because we'd been talking about it for 8 years, it wasn't a surprise. And I guess if you don't hear anything else, As you think about transition, you have got to communicate, and you got to start with your board, and you've got to start with your staff. And Kim's going to talk some more about what we did with the staff over this period of time. But communicate, and communicate some more. You've got to, and if you aren't already talking about the changes that need to happen, you need to start, because people have got to wrap their head around it, and it sometimes takes a while for them to do it. But I lost one board member in the process, and like I said, she's still a supporter of the agency. So I'm going to let Kim take over at this point.
So like Ann said, when we went to the board, we had already been working with making sure that every conversation we had with any of the individuals in the sheltered workshop, we were talking about community employment, and if they wanted to talk more about community employment, if they wanted answers to questions, et cetera, et cetera. So we had already began some people taking that step on their own. And when it came time to present to the board, I knew that I needed to show them the numbers of where we actually were. So we had 62 individuals who were working in the community and had already left the sheltered workshop. We had 36 individuals who, when we had talked about, what do you want to see in your future, they had decided to go to the activity center, which is a rehabilitation center here, for various reasons. Some of them had absolutely no desire to work whatsoever. And so the sheltered workshop could no longer be a place that focused pretty heavily on just having fun with friends. We wanted to make absolutely certain that if you were working in the sheltered workshop, that it was work and it was like a job. And so several people decided that that was not for them. They wanted to just kind of hang out with their friends and be laid back and not have to actually produce anything. So several people decided to go over there. 28 of the individuals retired because they were retirement age and they didn't want to get up in the morning and have to be somewhere at a certain time. So we actually, when I did go and present to the board, we had 15 individuals left that were working in the sheltered workshop. And from those 15 individuals, I was no longer just having them sit around and do nothing when there wasn't work to do. So their average hourly work week was less than 12 hours a day. Or a week, I'm sorry. And that included, out of those 15, 5 people were already working with Oak Rehab, and 1 person was working with DMH, saying that they were interested in working in the community. So the change has to start somewhere, and I think one of the biggest questions I get is, how did you start it? Well, we had to be very intentional and strategic. Like Ann said, we went to the conference in Detroit, and one of the main things that I heard was 1 person at a time, and don't pick the hardest person in your building. But in addition to that, I had to make sure that even if I started with that first person, did I have any sort of an infrastructure to be able to support the change that we were getting ready to make? And so it became very clear that there were a couple of positions that I needed to add on to my staff team. One of which was a full-time disability benefits specialist. If any of you have ever worked with anybody who's working in a sheltered workshop, you know that when you start talking about working in the community, one of the first questions you get asked is, well, but what about my benefits, or what about my son or daughter's benefits? So we actually have 2 full-time disability benefits specialists, and they have been through the entire VCU training course. They are completely certified, and they can assess and work with Social Security on any sort of disability benefit issues that may arrive either before employment, during employment, or just, the random letters that you get from Social Security that, unless you have a PhD, no one's really sure what it's saying. They're there to be able to help with those as well. That person is also my intake specialist. So for people coming into the center and saying, hey, I think I want to pursue employment, that's the first person that they meet as well, so that we have some sort of an idea right out of the gate, as do the individual and their team, of what is it going to look like with your current set of benefits if you seek employment. How many hours can you work and leave your benefit package exactly as it is? How many hours can you work, and what will the difference be if you choose to work more than that with your take-home pay versus what you would be getting from your benefits check? The other position that I had to look at was, when you talk about community employment, it's completely different than the sheltered employment sector, in that we're making real connections with real people that we see every day in our community. Instead of having a contract with the Department of Defense, this is right here in our own backyard. And so, just as important as the individual is to me as a client, our businesses are also clients. So I knew very early on that I had to have someone who would speak the language of the employer and be able to attend to the employer's needs as well. And so I have 2 full-time business developers now. I originally started with 1. And that person truly is the person that goes into some of the businesses in our local communities and says, what are the staffing needs that you're currently facing? And gets to know that employer a little bit better, so that hopefully we can make a connection and get someone in the door there. Additionally, once someone is employed, all kinds of things can change. And so it's a person that the employer can contact if he thinks, maybe we need to send in some additional supports, maybe something at work has changed drastically that we need to know about. Maybe something with the employer is changing and, he's being bought out by a bigger company, or, something along those lines. It's really someone who, first and foremost, attends to the needs of our businesses, because it's very important that when you make this transition, that you don't do any job jamming. These have to be good fits, both for the individual and the employer. What I seek out to do is to make sure that our individuals are hired just like any other individual would be hired anywhere, but that employer feels like there is no added bureaucracy or red tape along with employing someone from our agency. And so as such, my business developer is very key. Additionally, sometimes you have some incredibly talented people that are on your staff team, but they're not in the right seats on your bus. So when you step back and you look at this transition, you're going to need different positions than what you originally had, because my needs are different and the strengths of my staff are different. So it's really identifying the people who are currently on your bus and making sure that you have them in the right seats. Some people you can switch to different seats and still capitalize on these strengths. Others, sometimes maybe they don't belong on the bus anymore because they don't quite understand the picture. And it was really, really integral in the beginning that I start to identify who was sitting where and what I needed. So we did have some transitions that went on during the course of this time. We had a 25-plus year contract with a local manufacturing company here in Sedalia called APSE on Wheels. We had 9 people who were working out there, and everyone thought this was this wonderful arrangement because they were working, quote unquote, in the community. So when Anne put me over the APSE on crew, I went out there, and what I saw was that we had 9 individuals working there, 3 certified forklift drivers. They were capped at minimum wage, even though the other forklift drivers in that company were making considerably more than that. And my staff, or my individuals, were being pulled to work in other jobs in that organization. They were not being compensated as such. They had to get off the bus and use a separate door. They had a separate bathroom, a separate break room, a separate break time. I had to supply a table, a refrigerator, fans, etc. And to me, that was not integrated at all. And so I didn't really see this as working that much differently than if they were working here, as far as talking about community employment. So we went and we met with their executive team and said, hey, we've had a 25-plus year contract with you guys. You're incredibly happy with the results that you see from the individuals coming from the center. What we would like to do is for you to hire them on as your employees, pay them your wages, and then we would continue to support them there. Unfortunately, their executive team did not want to pursue that, and so we had to cease that relationship. I can report that out of all of the 9 individuals, there were 3 individuals that did not pursue employment outside of Maxion, but the rest of them all have obtained employment in the community. And I think the majority of them are actually still working in the original places that they started working back when we did that. And that was a couple years before we closed the sheltered workshop.
I think this is Ann again. I just wanted to mention on this crew, we also learned something that I don't know there's many of you know, but if a person is working through your workshop, even if they're out on a community enclave or community crew like this, if they lose their job, they don't qualify for unemployment benefits. And that was the first time we knew that was with this Maxion crew. And boy, that really hit me hard that our sheltered employment jobs do not qualify for unemployment.
Because the unemployment office considered them subsidized wages, and they do not pay unemployment for subsidized wages. So yeah, that was definitely we had never encountered that before until the first individual brought in the letter from unemployment. So what we ended up doing was they were the priority 9. So my business developer worked day and night to make sure that we got them into good employment positions as quickly as possible. We had a similar situation with the recycling center here in the city of Sedalia. It was a 7-year crew. Same thing, met with the executive team at the city of Sedalia. They did not want to hire people with disabilities themselves. At this point, I'd already been through this before, so I was a little less fearful and saying, all right, fine, we're going to cease this contract. And so I can also report that those individuals are all working very successfully in the community as well. We in Saline County, Marshall, Missouri, our sheltered workshop there had a 25-plus year recycling contract with ConAgra. Pretty much the very same scenario as what I described at Maxion. When we met with them, they also said that they would not be hiring anyone with a disability to work for them. So at that point, that was the main contract I had at the Saline County Sheltered Workshop. So we made the decision to cease that recycling contract. We did not re-sign, and we closed the Saline County Sheltered Workshop. So once we had done that, we were, this was probably one of the toughest that I did because it was the first one. And so very early on, I did decide that the one thing I wanted to do was to sit down and meet individually with each individual and their parent or guardian. And so the day that we announced to the individuals and the parent or guardians, we had not announced it publicly anywhere. My staff were not even aware that this was happening because I wanted this to be a very controlled message. So I wanted the individuals that were working in our sheltered workshop to have the dignity of hearing this from me rather than hearing it from word of mouth before I could meet with them. So we blocked off a day. I met with every individual. I met with every individual's parent. It was a long day, and it was a hard day, and it was an emotional day. But I think it was definitely the right thing to do because any of their frustrations they could voice with me rather than voicing with my staff. I could answer any questions that I had the answer to. And quite honestly, the questions I didn't have the answer to, I was very quick to tell them that I apologize. I don't know the answer to that yet because some of them were unanswerable questions. But after I met with each individual, then I met with the entire staff team. And then the next day is when it came out in the paper so that all of our individuals and our staff got to hear it from me before the community heard it, so that I could control the message and I could make sure that they understood what the basis behind that decision was. So additionally, when I started looking at the recycling crew in Sedalia, and like I had referenced before, I was down to really having 9 people that were not interested at that point in community employment working in the sheltered workshop. The referrals for our large contracts were down. That's when we made the decision that we really do need to switch this, and it's time to close the Pettis County or the Sedalia sheltered workshop, which is the one that we've referenced several times as the first sheltered workshop in the state of Missouri. This one, even though I'd been through a closure, was equally as daunting because this was it. I mean, we started here 50 plus years ago. And the main thing I wanted to make sure I did was I wanted everyone that I talked to understand that I did not think sheltered workshops were a bad thing. It was never my plan to close the sheltered workshops. And I had an amazing amount of respect for the people that had been so innovative in thinking of how to pull a sheltered workshop into Sedalia, Missouri. And I wanted that to be a key piece of how the message went out. So again, that day I did the same thing. We were very, very orchestrated with our Sedalia closure. And I'll talk about our marketing plan in a second. But we met with all of the individuals and their guardians. My staff were not aware. I had a few key staff that were aware, so they could help me in getting the individuals and their guardians scheduled to meet with me. And I sat down with each of them and explained it. And I will say the one surprising part of the Sedalia closure was that several of the guardians said that while it saddened them to see the sheltered workshop come to an end, they were not surprised because they were able to see some of the successes that we had been putting out in the community and or that their child had been talking about because their friends had been working in the community.
This is Ann again. I also just want to add in here, we haven't really talked about money at all or finances, but it's probably important to know that as people started becoming employed in the community, our contracts at our sheltered workshops, like Kim said, were becoming less and less and less. Our major contract in Sedalia with our first aid kits, because there was not a war going on, we were producing less and less and less contracts. And she alluded to that when she said that we were down to 12 hours a week on an average with people. We had part of the presentation to our board included the fact that we had been losing a substantial amount of money probably for the last 15 years and had been supporting it through community donations and those kind of things. But on top of all the other changes, we were also losing a substantial amount of money.
So the other thing, we closed the workshop and we were so focused on everyone working in the community that one day it dawned on me that I kind of forgot about our custodial crew here. And I had to come into Ann and say, we've done great. We've transitioned all these people and we're working with them. And so many people have jobs in the community, but our custodial crew is still working as a crew. And they're still getting their paycheck from the sheltered workshop corporation that we had. So again, if we had laid any of them off, they wouldn't be eligible for unemployment. And so I think if all of the employers in our communities are embracing this and are hiring our individuals, why aren't we at the Center for Human Services? And it was simply because we hadn't noticed that we hadn't done it yet. So that was something that we had to quickly remedy as well. And so we did away with the crew, and we have certain positions at different locations, and they are staff members now. And I think that a lot of staff here, especially like in the headquarters office that's administrative staff, I don't think that they thought that there was going to be that big of a difference. But then they got to see how proud the individuals were of getting a badge, because we have swipe badges to let you in and out of places, and how much it meant to them to say that they were our coworker instead of staff, because that's what they had referred to. Everyone working in this building with an ID badge was always staff. They didn't feel like we were their coworkers. And so I think that it made a huge impression upon the CHS staff actually seeing how important this was and how that transition really meant something. So when we closed the sheltered workshop on June 30th, we had went from 141 people down to 6. And of those 6, 5 of those individuals were working with vocational rehabilitation to find a job in the community. So we've done this presentation a couple times, and like Ann said, I track all of these numbers on the dashboard. We report them to the board, but I think until just recently I looked because, now it's not 2018, so I can take a breath and look back and see where we went. And we had some massive organizational change going on in a very short amount of time. And you can tell, I mean, the people in that picture, they were not crying because it was their last day in the sheltered workshop. They were ready for their next adventure. And I think that speaks to how we managed that organizational change and how we really slowly, methodically, strategically, and intentionally talk to the individuals throughout the entire process. Also, I think sometimes we allowed the change to be organic. You have to make your successes visible. Don't hide them, because when someone has an amazing success, even if it's working 2 days a week, 2 hours a shift, if that's the most that they've ever worked in the community and that's what they want and that's their goal, that's a success for that person. And so let that person shine. The best marketing that we got was word of mouth from the individuals to the other individuals. And Ann talked about it. They go to an event in the community and one of them is saving up to buy a new PlayStation, and the other one wants to know, how did you come by the money to do that? And it's not just about buying things, because, that's one of the questions most people have is, what did you do with your first paycheck? It's not about that paycheck. It's about the ability to have one and the ability to dictate a little bit of my life and being able to really, really direct it. Because I truly believe that employment allows our individuals to have the most autonomy that many of them have been able to experience. And so allow them to brag and to talk to their friends about how they feel so much more independent, and they have some semblance, if you will, of directing what their days look like and not having someone direct it for them. And allowing them to say, like, we have one individual that we were somewhere and they asked him, well, what did this job mean to you? Well, what this job meant to him was that his quote is, I felt like a citizen. I felt like I belonged in the community. I didn't go and visit it. Like, one of my big things is the community is not a Disney destination. You don't go home and say, hey, how's everyone? How about we go visit the community today? So accessing the community and being part of the community are two different things, and I think employment really gets you there. WIOA was very, very instrumental in allowing me to shut the front door on the workshop. No longer could someone come straight from education into the sheltered workshop, and no longer could anyone come and say, I just want to work in the sheltered workshop. We had to look at every other option first. So we have to look at voc rehab first. If voc rehab won't work, then we looked at the options through the DMH waiver services. If that didn't work and there was some reason for that, then we would look at the workshop, but no longer could you go fast track into the sheltered work setting. I think the biggest part of making this happen is to continually plan. We had a very well coordinated communication plan. It was tedious. It was down to the hour on the day of how this news was going to go out. Because again, I wanted our individuals to have that dignity of knowing this before anyone else did. So leading up to the date, we were just putting success stories in the paper and continuing to do what we always do, especially with my employment services Facebook page. We put successes on there all the time. So that by the time that we were ready, we talked to the individuals. Then I talked to my staff that afternoon after I talked to the individuals. Then the next morning, we had a spread in the paper that, yes, it announced that we were closing the sheltered workshop. It said that we weren't closing it tomorrow. We were closing it in a couple months. But look at all of the success we had and why we made this decision that we were going to close and where we're going in the future. And then staff buy-in. Staff buy-in is absolutely necessary. One of the main things that we did was I continued to message and meet with staff. And so I had several visioning meetings between the time we started this process and where we were. We had a meeting back when WIOA first came out, just talking about what it meant and what it meant to us and where we were going to go with that, so that none of this was a surprise to any of my staff coming in. The other thing was when I had the meeting with them that afternoon and I said, we had made the decision that we are going to close the sheltered workshop. I've met with all the individuals. I knew who was going to get the questions on the fly, and that was going to be my staff in the community. And I didn't want them to feel like they were out there on their own. So I came up with a list of questions that I thought they might get answered, and I gave them my responses to those questions. I didn't want them to memorize my answer by any stretch. What I wanted them to do was see how someone asked me that question, how would I answer it? So that they didn't have to come up with it on the fly. And they knew exactly the mindset that I had when talking about why we did this, why we did that, what does this mean, so that they had it as a resource. I know several of them came up to me afterwards and told me that not only did they appreciate having it because they felt a little less exposed, but they also appreciated the opportunity to talk through it with me and to question me really on why we had made this change without fear of retribution. Because if I didn't allow them to ask me a million questions, how were they going to be prepared when they got asked those? Again, transparency the whole time. I was transparent with the parents. I was transparent with the staff. I had been transparent all the way up to that point. And I think that that really allows you to have buy-in at a multitude of levels, because you're not trying to convince everybody that you know the answer to everything, but you are telling them that, with the information that I have right now, this is where we need to be headed for our future. And remember your why. Change is hard, and making a change like this is very, 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 very hard. We have people that had been here since high school. We had people that this is all they knew and they sought a safe place. And we had people that were just upset. Like, not everybody took this information and was excited about it. So there were days that were hard, and there were days that it was difficult to figure it out. Like, if A happens, then what is C going to be? Because I know B, but I'm not quite sure about C. So remembering your why and why we're all here. None of us are in this field to make $1 million, and none of us are in this field for reasons that are materialistic. We're in this field because we want to make the place better, and we want to be able to stand up for individuals that maybe have never been able to stand up for themselves, and being able to remember that. And one of the key pieces, and it is a huge perk of my position, is if I was having a really bad day, I would get in my car and I would go and I would physically see and be with some of the individuals who had been successful. And I think that when you're having a really rough day, if you just take the time to go back and say, whew, this is why I do this, and this is why this change is important. Because look at how far Dylan has become, or look at how far Bob has come, and everyone told him that he couldn't. And now look at him. He does not want to go back to the sheltered workshop at all because he's incredibly happy. Which leads me to let your champions, your success stories shine. And your champions are really the individuals that you've helped to get there. The picture that you see right now is a handful of individuals that last year wanted to go to the Capitol and talk about why Employment First is important to them and what it's meant to them. And so these are people who had worked in the sheltered workshop and thought that that was the best thing that they could possibly do as far as income and being a part of their community. And every one of them now works in the community. Very, very, very happy with their positions. They were not afraid at all to bend a legislator's ear to tell them, when you hear about individuals and you hear about people working in their communities, you need to support it, because I am a constituent of your community, and this is why it's important to me. And then one piece that I don't think I talked about that everyone always asks is the types of jobs and the number of hours that people obtained when we got them their community jobs. And we have people who work full-time, and we have people who work part-time. And from part-time, we have some people that work 1 hour a day, 3 days a week, because it is the most that he can do. And that's what he wants at this point. Obviously, our goal is to get him up to 2 hours a day. But at this point, all he can do physically is the 1 hour, up to people who are working over 40 hours a week, because they also are on-call phones and are working in excess of their already 40-hour job. And our benefit specialists have been able to walk them through. They've come off of benefits and are now paying into a 401k or a 403b, depending upon where they work. They have vacation, they have sick time, and they are just an employee like every one of us. And then the number of hours, like I said, in the full-time, part-time, it just depends. We have some people that did start out very part-time and have transitioned into full-time positions. And then we have some people who they're just not interested in full-time employment and all they want is part-time. So it really is dependent upon the person, where they're at. And then we also, like I said, we have some people who have even switched jobs because they've worked at a job consistently part-time and they've come in and they've said, I want to work somewhere else and I want to work more hours. And so we work with them to find another job, provide their 2 weeks notice and move on, just like all of us have. Some of the lessons that we learned along the way would again be to definitely reiterate doing it one person at a time. That's not that was a hard one for me to do because I am one of those people that when I have a vision, I want to make it happen as soon as absolutely possible, and you just can't with this sort of a transition because it's not fair to the person. And there was a lot to be learned from each individual that we did. So whether that would be the first person we started with or the fifth person, we learned something with every single person that we took on. We still learn something every single day. Next, don't be afraid of change. Change is hard. Your staff is going to be resistant in the beginning, but if you're not afraid of it, that is going to come through in all of your messaging. And change isn't necessarily bad. Again, like my quote here, don't be afraid to give up the good to go for the great. I mean, we were good. We were wonderful at what we did. But now seeing what our individuals have been able to do, now we're working on the great because seeing how happy they are and how much this change has meant for them and some of their successes that they've seen outside of work because of work makes it all worth every bit of that change. Be transparent and admit your mistakes. When you start out, you're going to make some mistakes. We still make some mistakes, and it's owning up to those, being transparent, and learning from them truly. Everybody tries to act like it's business, business, business. It's emotional when you make a change such as this, especially when you make that announcement, because I knew that they would remember my face and those words for the rest of their life. And that's emotional, and you have to be prepared for it, and their emotions are real, and it is okay, and you have to respect those emotions. And if you have to go, get in your car for 10 minutes and break down for a few because you realize the gravity of what you're doing, that's fine. Just pick yourself back up again, admit your mistakes, walk in that room, be transparent, and talk about how we're shooting for the great. And then also remember that people will surprise you because, like I said, I was very nervous when we did this with the Sedalia workshop because it had been here for 50 years. But hearing the people tell me that while they were sad, they were not surprised. And a couple of them even said that they would not want to trade places with me, even though they knew that it's what was best for the center and the community. That was great. And so just allow yourself to let people surprise you with how amazing and supportive they can really be.
I just have got to tell a story. We had one of our senators that came to visit and do a tour. And we decided we would take him out to visit one of our local factories where we have a man named Kelly who was employed there. And when Kelly first got his job, he had been employed in the sheltered workshop for a period of time. And I can remember going out and talking or trying to talk to Kelly when he was in the sheltered workshop. Kelly is a man who has autism. And I would go out and say, "Hi, Kelly, how you doing?" And he would bow his head and he would close his eyes and he would kind of clench his fists and he wouldn't look at me and he wouldn't talk to me. And I hadn't seen Kelly for quite a while. He started at a local broom factory, is actually what it is. He had started as a part-time employee in a job sharing situation with another young man. And over time had increased those hours and had decided to go full-time. And we took this senator out there to see what Kelly was doing. And we walked in the back door of the factory because that was closest to where they were working. And Kelly looked up when he saw us come in, and he knew we were coming to see him. And he came around his workstation. He stuck out his hand to the senator, looked him in the eye, and said hello, and then proceeded to spend about 20 minutes with the senator, showing him the job that he was doing. And when I saw that transformation in Kelly, his confidence, his demeanor, his ability to communicate, he was talking in full sentences, and it was just amazing, the transformation from what I had seen 2 years before with him. The same thing happened. We had a new executive director that came to visit, and we have a young man that I think it was the guy that Kim was talking about was working 1 hour. He's working in a local nursing home. And I told the executive director, we're going to go out and visit with this young man, and he's nonverbal. He probably won't talk to you. But we're just going to observe him doing his job, and his job is to take refreshments to the individuals who are living in the nursing home. And so I fully expected to walk in, and I actually had not ever been out there to see him. Walk in and see somebody that was nonverbal, and we were just going to follow him around. The first thing this kid does is he comes up to her and shakes her hand and says, "Hi." Gave her his name and how are you doing, and carried on a conversation. Again, after a period of maybe a year in his job, he's gone from being totally nonverbal and not communicating to communicating in short sentences. But he's very his life has changed because he's working in the community. So those were just two stories that I wanted to tell. The other thing that we haven't addressed yet, that I just wrote myself a note, is our building. Like I said, that our building was a donated building, 60,000 square foot building in the middle of the industrial park. And I wish I had a really good plan to tell you of how we dealt with our building. What we have right now is a building that is half empty. And what I have is a building that was a community development block grant project, $400,000 project, that if I can't find another qualifying business to occupy by December, I'm going to have to pay back to community development block grant about $200,000 of that $400,000. We are working very hard on it. I've got a board committee that is working on how to transform the building. We've got lots of ideas, but I don't have my building taken care of yet. So I know that that's a question that people had, but we are working diligently on it. So with that, I think that we are done with our part of the presentation. If there are any questions, I guess, Aubrey, people put those in the chat box. Is that right?
Yep, people are welcome to put their questions in the chat box. You're also, if you have a microphone, you're welcome to jump on. It looks like someone's typing. Okay, well, while Rachel is typing, if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to jump on. And then also note that in the right-hand side under files, I have uploaded a certificate as well for anyone who needs that for their continuing education credits.
Sure. So to answer Rachel's question, it was very, very important that after I had the meetings with the guardian and the individual, that we pulled their team together. So whoever that team might be, for some people, it included targeted case managers. For some people, it included people from the local church. To talk about all of the different resources that were available, because that is an issue sometimes, is that, parents or caregivers don't have the same hours as what the individual working would have. And so it's really finding things that will allow that person to still feel like they're having a meaningful day while they are not at work. And so for some people, they go to different programs and activities. Some people blend programs and activities. I know there were some people that went to a day habilitation program here on certain days and hours, and then they went to another program similar to that on certain days and hours. Then, like aquatics on Tuesdays and horse riding on Fridays, whatever that may be. So it really just depends on the situation, but it's truly looking at all of the resources available in the community that are not specifically tailored to individuals with disabilities as well, because there are other things going on in your communities that they may want to partake in also. And then part of it too, we looked at what times of the days do they want to work, because some people not everybody is a morning person. So some people we look at evening jobs, and some people we look at morning jobs for the same thing. And some of the individuals were able to have caregivers or guardians work around that. Some individuals lived in residential settings, and the residential settings had to work through the same thing because maybe they were not originally staffed at the times that now they would need to be staffed at. But again, it was a team planning process.
Okay, do we have any more questions from anyone else?
It's the same.
Okay, I'm just going to give Rachel a second to finish up.
And another person is now too. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Hopefully we were able to, if nothing else, tell you about some of the things that you can avoid going forward or take into consideration moving forward. She said that was fabulous. Thank you.
Rachel's still talking.
Okay, if no one else has any more questions, then we will wrap it up. Again, oh, Rachel just popped in with a question, actually. I will let you guys go ahead and take that.
How did the cost of services equal out? I.e., did the individual budgets change in general? How the state account for it? Do you want me to take it or you? So for some of our individuals, budget-wise, it didn't affect them at all because they were not waiver recipients. So they did not have any sort of ISL residential budget attached to them. For individuals that were waiver recipients, the state of Missouri has said that cost cannot be considered when talking about employment. So it did not matter if it would increase their budget by however much. Employment was a given that they would be able to partake in. Now, as far as the state accounting for it, that would be the only other thing would be if they worked through voc rehab, but there is money there. We were not on a wait list with vocational rehabilitation at that time. So the money was there. They could partake in it just like anybody else. And then for the people with ISLs and group home budgets, again, it was more of a staffing issue, I guess, for the residential providers. But again, we met as a team and worked through that. Are you the only provider in your area, or are there other sheltered workshops, and have they come on board? In the areas that we were talking about, we were like the Sedalia and Marshall, we're the only workshops there. There are workshops in our very close to us actually, in some surrounding counties. I would say that currently, most of them have not tried to look at switching and transitioning into competitive community employment yet. In Missouri, there's a very strong push. They have an association that they pay dues to, and I would say the push is to focus on just trying to maintain the sheltered workshops and not look at other options. And so there have been a couple that have just asked us and picked our brain, but overwhelmingly, most of the other sheltered workshops just did not like what we did, because ultimately I think they didn't want people to question what they were doing. Has this changed the way your state looks at day services? Did they make changes to the coding to account for the individualization of services?
Our state has had some discussions around day services. At this point, they haven't really tried to mess with day services too much. I think that where the conversations are happening really is more at the state level, where they're saying, they're trying to make a push for employment first. I think there's been some conversations around how many people are receiving day services that could be employed. And I think they're pushing that really through the individual planning process. As far as making changes to the coding, I don't think so. We're in the process right now of rewriting all of our waiver definitions. And so, there may be some changes that way, but we're trying, I know we're trying to broaden our day services definition to include some options for people to explore. I know that they've added some employment definitions to the new waiver that will come out in a year, I think, that allow us to do benefits planning and get paid for it. And some of those kind of things, but it's more been in conversation than it has been in actual changes to the system.
Did you have to work with other providers for the clients you help, such as did they have residential services with a different provider? How did they work with you? We have a lot of clients that live with one provider and go to day programs or workshops with other providers. Yes, 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 and yes. We worked with a lot of providers actually that, and we still do, not just with the people transitioning out of the sheltered workshop, but in everything we do, that live in other residential settings. And I would say we have had huge successes with some. There are a couple of for-private residential, or for-profit, what did I say, for-private? Oh, whoops. For-profit residential settings, and a couple of for-profit day services that have been tricky to work with because of the way that Missouri is set up. We're a fee-for-service provider, so in order for them to pull in any sort of income on the individual has to be there during their set hours. So those have been a little sticky. We have had some successes with them, but they are the ones that we continue to, I guess, have resistance with. But for the most part, it's those for-profit providers, and it seems to be pretty much income-based. If your individuals didn't want a community job but wanted a blended day service program that provided in-house work opportunities and activities, was that an option? No, it was not. Not with the Center for Human Services anyway. If they wanted an in-house employment option, they would have had to look at a different provider, because we decided we are only supporting individuals in integrated competitive community settings.
But we do have the option of having someone be in a day service for part of a day and work part of a day.
Correct.
The individual, I think, that works only an hour, for instance, goes to a day program for part of his day, I believe. So, yeah. So that is an option for people, and they don't have to go to our day program. We have several day program providers.
You're welcome.
Nope.
She said thank you.
I would just say,
Okay.
and we're happy to take more questions, but our contact information is here on this last slide. And, if you have questions later and you want to call, if it's an operational question, you'll want to call Kim or email Kim. If it's something about, the organization, certainly call me or email me, and we'll try to get back with you as soon as possible.
And if you aren't sure, feel free to email both of us, and one of us will get back to you.
Okay, if everyone is comfortable with the questions, again, just note that there is a certificate under the Files tab, and we will be uploading this onto our website with captioning here soon as well. So you'll have access that way and can share it with your coworkers. Yeah, please feel free to email Anne or Kimberly, email myself if you have any questions. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming on today. And thank you, Anne and Kimberly, for giving us a great presentation.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. All right, bye.